When Mia, a loyal and hardworking employee, is ruthlessly fired by her manipulative CEO Ethan to save his own fortune, she vows to expose him. As she uncovers a trail of embezzlement and fraud, she orchestrates his public downfall, only to discover that the real mastermind isn't who she thought. In a shocking twist, Ethan's seemingly powerless wife, Madeline, emerges as the true puppeteer behind the schemes, leaving Mia caught in a web of deception. With revenge served, but justice far from done, Mia must decide if she's willing to take on the ultimate villain. A gripping tale of betrayal, power plays, and the high stakes of revenge, this story will keep you guessing until the very last twist. I don't think anyone starts a job expecting to end up planning their boss's downfall, but life has a funny way of pulling you in directions you never anticipated. 5 years ago, I was an optimistic 26-year-old, thrilled to join a small tech startup that seemed full of promise. They called it Innovex, and the moment I walked through those glass doors for my interview, I was sold. It wasn't just the sleek, modern office or the energy of people typing furiously at their desks, it was Ethan, the CEO. Ethan had a way of drawing you in. He was charismatic, sharp, and always spoke about the future like he had a crystal ball hidden in his desk drawer. During the interview, he said things like, "This company is going to change the industry," and "We reward loyalty and innovation." He looked me straight in the eye, leaned forward, and said, "Mia, you strike me as someone who doesn't just want a job. You want to build something. Join us, and you'll be part of something bigger than yourself." I swallowed the bait, hook, line, and sinker. The first year was a dream. I poured everything into Innovex, long hours, weekends, missed vacations. Ethan was right, it did feel like building something from the ground up. I was part of a small but scrappy team, and my ideas actually mattered. I spearheaded a campaign that doubled our client base. I designed processes that streamlined operations. I worked so hard that some of my coworkers started jokingly calling me the machine. Ethan loved it. He'd stop by my desk with a grin and say, "You're a rock star, Mia." At company meetings, he'd single me out, praising my work in front of everyone. It felt good, knowing my efforts were noticed. And every time I started to feel the burnout creeping in, Ethan would dangle the carrot, "We're on the brink of something huge. Stick with me, and you'll be rewarded beyond your wildest dreams." But as the years went by, that carrot started to look a little suspicious. Raises were promised but never delivered. My promotion to project manager, which Ethan mentioned should happen by next quarter, during my second year, was delayed again and again. At first, I convinced myself that it was just the nature of startups, cash-strapped, always chasing the next big client. But then I noticed something that made my stomach sink. While I was slogging away at my desk, Ethan was living large. He showed up to the office in a brand new Tesla. He and his wife went on lavish vacations, which he proudly showed off on Instagram, skiing in the Alps, yachting in the Mediterranean. And the kicker? A diamond-studded anniversary gift he bought for his wife, which he casually bragged about costing 6 figures. That's when I started to question everything. If the company was struggling financially, as Ethan claimed during every "sorry, no bonuses this quarter" meeting, how could he afford all that? Still, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he was using personal savings. Maybe he'd made some lucky investments. I told myself not to overthink it. Then came the rumors. It started as hushed conversations between coworkers when Ethan wasn't around. "Have you heard about the merger?" someone whispered in the break room one afternoon. "What merger?" I asked, genuinely confused. No one would give me a straight answer, but the tension in the office was palpable. People were suddenly on edge, watching their backs. Projects that used to be collaborative became cutthroat. Everyone was scrambling to protect their turf. I stayed out of it at first. Office politics wasn't my thing, and I was too busy trying to meet deadlines. But one night, as I was staying late to finalize a client presentation, I overheard a conversation that changed everything. Ethan's office was next to the conference room where I was working. I was minding my own business when I heard voices, Ethan's and someone else's. I couldn't make out the words at first, but their tone was urgent, almost conspiratorial. I leaned closer to the wall, my curiosity piqued. "She's been with the company too long," Ethan was saying. "Her stock options are too significant. If we keep her on through the merger, it'll cost us a fortune." I froze. The other voice, someone I later realized was the company's lawyer, replied, "You're sure about this? She's been one of your most valuable employees." Ethan laughed, a cold, dismissive sound that made my blood boil. "Valuable? Sure, but she's replaceable. I'll spin it like a budget cut or restructuring. She'll cry about it for a week and move on. People like her always do." I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. Replaceable. After everything I'd done for this company, after sacrificing my time, my energy, and my health, that's how Ethan saw me. A number to be erased from the ledger. I wanted to storm into his office right then and there, to demand answers, to tell him exactly what I thought of him. But I didn't. Something stopped me, a voice in the back of my mind, cold and calculating, whispering, "Not yet." I packed up my things and left the office, my mind racing. By the time I got home, I had made up my mind, Ethan wasn't going to get away with this. If he thought I'd just cry about it for a week and move on, he was dead wrong. Revenge wasn't an impulse for me, it was a process. I spent the next few days in a haze of planning. I didn't sleep much. I barely ate. I was consumed by one thought: if I'm going down, I'm taking Ethan with me. But to do that, I needed leverage. And that meant digging deep. I started with the files on my work laptop. Ethan was meticulous about keeping certain things private, but he wasn't as careful as he thought. Hidden in plain sight, buried in folders labeled with vague names like quarterly reports, were financial records that didn't add up. Fake invoices. Payments to a consultant who didn't seem to exist. Shell companies with no discernible purpose. Piece by piece, I uncovered the truth: Ethan was embezzling money from the company. Not enough to bankrupt it, but enough to fund his lavish lifestyle. I stared at the evidence, my heart pounding. It was all there, laid out in black and white. If I went public with this, Ethan wouldn't just lose his job, he'd lose everything. But I wasn't ready to pull the trigger. Not yet. This wasn't just about exposing Ethan's crimes, it was about making him feel the same helplessness, the same betrayal, that I felt. And for that, I needed to bide my time. When Ethan finally called me into his office 2 weeks later, I was ready. He had that same smug smile he always wore, the one that used to seem charming but now made me sick. "Mia," he said, leaning back in his chair, "I'm afraid I have some bad news." I kept my face neutral, even as my pulse quickened. "What's going on?" I asked, feigning confusion. "It's not personal," he began, launching into a rehearsed speech about budget cuts and shifting priorities. He didn't even have the decency to look me in the eye. When he finally got to the point, "We're letting you go," I nodded, like I understood. But inside, I was already plotting his destruction. When I walked out of Ethan's office that day, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad or heartbroken either. Those emotions had burned out, leaving something sharper, colder, pure focus. Ethan thought he'd won, thought I'd slink away quietly, maybe even thank him for the opportunity. He had no idea that by firing me, he'd unleashed something he couldn't control. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I took a detour to my favorite coffee shop, sat in the corner with my laptop, and began organizing everything I had collected. I had already backed up files from my work computer onto a personal hard drive, emails, financial records, client communications, everything I could think of that might be useful. But I needed more than data. I needed a plan. The first thing I did was create a timeline. It started with the day I overheard Ethan's conversation and ended with, "Well, I wasn't sure yet." That was the beauty of this, I had time. Ethan thought I was out of his hair, but he didn't know that I wasn't done with him. Not even close. For the next few days, I laid low. I didn't tell anyone I'd been fired, not even my closest friends. I needed to stay invisible for a while, to move in the shadows while I pieced everything together. I spent hours combing through the files I'd collected, creating a dossier so detailed it could have been used in a courtroom. And maybe, eventually, it would be. It was during one of those late nights, my eyes blurry from staring at spreadsheets, that I found the key to Ethan's undoing. There it was, tucked away in a folder labeled Miscellaneous Expenses, a series of payments made to a shell company called Ardent Solutions. On the surface, it looked legitimate. The invoices were for consulting services, but the more I dug, the more I realized Ardent Solutions didn't actually exist. No website, no business registration, nothing. The payments, however, were very real. They totaled nearly $500,000 over 3 years. And here's where it got interesting. The owner of Ardent Solutions, according to the wire transfer details, was named Madeline Grayson. Ethan's wife's maiden name was Grayson. I stared at the screen, a slow grin spreading across my face. Ethan wasn't just stealing from the company, he was funneling money into a fake business under his wife's name. That wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. I spent the next few days pulling on that thread. I scoured public records, combed through old emails, and even paid for a subscription to a corporate database to search for connections. Everything pointed to the same conclusion: Ethan was embezzling money and using his wife's fake business to cover it up. But knowing wasn't enough. I needed proof, and I needed to deliver it in a way that would devastate him completely. Step 1 of my plan was to ensure that Innovex's board of directors couldn't ignore what I had found. Innovex was small, but it had recently started attracting attention from bigger players in the tech industry. The upcoming merger was a big deal, and I knew the board would be hypersensitive to anything that could jeopardize it. Ethan's shady dealings were exactly the kind of thing that could blow up in their faces if it came to light. I drafted an anonymous letter detailing everything I had uncovered. I attached the financial records, the invoices, and even a few choice emails where Ethan had casually discussed creative accounting. I sent it to each board member individually, using burner email accounts I created specifically for this purpose. Then I waited. It didn't take long. Less than a week later, Ethan's name disappeared from Innovex's website. The company announced in a vague press release that he was stepping down to pursue other opportunities. But I wasn't satisfied. Ethan might have lost his job, but he hadn't lost enough. Not yet. Step 2 was more public. During my time at Innovex, I had made a lot of connections in the tech world. One of those connections was a journalist named Laura, someone I had met at a networking event a couple of years ago. Laura specialized in corporate scandals, and her stories had taken down more than a few high-profile executives. If anyone could turn Ethan's downfall into a spectacle, it was her. I reached out to Laura under the guise of catching up. We met for coffee, and after a bit of small talk, I casually mentioned my recent career transition. I played the part of the disillusioned ex-employee, someone who had seen too much but didn't know what to do with the information. Laura's eyes lit up when I told her about the fake invoices and the shell company. "Are you willing to share documentation?" she asked, her voice low. "I might have some things," I said, playing coy. "But I don't want my name attached to any of this. Ethan's, well, let's just say he doesn't take kindly to people who cross him." Laura nodded. "We can protect your identity. But if this is as big as you're saying, it'll be impossible for him to keep this under wraps." That was exactly what I wanted to hear. I sent Laura a carefully curated selection of documents later that night. Not everything, just enough to get the ball rolling. I knew she would investigate further, and when she did, she would find more than enough to corroborate the story. While Laura worked on her expose, I focused on step 3, securing my financial future. Ethan thought he had cut me out of the merger, but he underestimated me. During my years at Innovex, I had been privy to countless strategy meetings, financial projections, and merger discussions. I knew exactly how much the company's value would skyrocket once the merger was finalized, and I planned to capitalize on it. Using the severance check Innovex had given me, generous, probably because they wanted me to stay quiet, I set up an anonymous investment account. Then I started buying up shares of Innovex through a shell entity of my own. It wasn't illegal, but it was poetic. Ethan's plan to cut me out would backfire spectacularly when I became one of the company's top shareholders. The day Laura's article went live, I woke up to a flurry of texts and missed calls. Friends and former coworkers were losing their minds. "Have you seen this?" one text read, with a link to the article. The headline was brutal: Tech CEO accused of embezzling millions through fake consulting firm. The article was even worse, for Ethan, anyway. Laura had gone all out, painting a damning picture of his greed and deceit. She had quotes from anonymous employees, some of whom I had subtly nudged her toward, and a detailed breakdown of the financial discrepancies. By the time I finished reading it, I was grinning so hard my cheeks hurt. Ethan's name was everywhere. Tech blogs, news sites, even Reddit threads were tearing him apart. Innovex's board issued a statement claiming they had no knowledge of Ethan's activities and would cooperate fully with any investigations. Ethan, of course, was silent. But I knew that wouldn't last. People like him always try to spin the narrative in their favor. The problem was, this time, there was nothing he could say that would save him. I wasn't done yet. The morning after Laura's article dropped, Ethan's world started crumbling in real time, and I was there to watch every piece of it fall apart. His name was plastered all over the internet, social media was tearing him to shreds, and news outlets kept picking up the story. The greedy CEO, they called him. A wolf in tech's clothing. The hashtags were brutal: hashtag Ethan exposed, hashtag fake CEO, hashtag ardent scammer. It was delicious. I could almost picture him sitting in his multi-million-dollar home, his phone lighting up with calls he didn't want to answer, emails flooding his inbox, his carefully constructed world slipping through his fingers. I wasn't just watching him burn, I was the one holding the match. But I wasn't satisfied yet. The thing about revenge is that it has layers. Public humiliation was one, but financial ruin? That was another entirely. Ethan had fired me to save himself a few dollars in stock payouts. I wanted to make sure that decision cost him everything. The first step in destroying his finances was simple: keep digging. While Innovex scrambled to clean up the mess, I kept my ear to the ground. My former co-workers were buzzing with gossip, and I had a couple of them on speed dial. One of them, a developer named Sam who had always been wary of Ethan, told me something interesting. Apparently, Ethan's wife left him, Sam said during a late-night phone call. She moved out of the house yesterday. Word is she's been meeting with divorce lawyers for weeks. This was perfect. Ethan had used his wife, Madeline, to create the fake company that funneled money out of Innovex. If she turned on him, she might take him down faster than any journalist or board investigation ever could. And if there's one thing people love more than a corporate scandal, it's a messy divorce wrapped in it. So I started looking into Madeline. I wasn't sure how far she'd been complicit in Ethan's schemes. Was she an active participant, or just a name on paper? Either way, I needed to figure out where she stood. It wasn't hard to find her. Public records showed that she had moved into a rental property downtown, one of those modern high-rises with a doorman and a pool on the roof. I waited outside one afternoon, dressed in a way that made me look like an anonymous professional, bland but polished, the kind of person no one remembers. When she emerged from the building, I followed her, keeping my distance. She went to a coffee shop a few blocks away and sat by the window, scrolling through her phone. I waited until she looked settled, then walked up and introduced myself. Hi, Mrs. Grayson, Madeline, right? I said with a nervous smile. Sorry to bother you, but I used to work at Innovex. I thought I'd introduce myself. She looked up at me, startled. Up close, she looked tired, deep circles under her eyes, her face thinner than it appeared in the glamorous photos Ethan used to post on social media. She stared at me for a moment, then motioned to the empty seat across from her. Go ahead. I sat down, keeping my expression neutral but open. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything that's happening. I can't imagine how difficult this must be for you. She raised an eyebrow. And why exactly are you sorry? Did you help him steal that money? I shook my head quickly. Not at all. In fact, I was one of the people who uncovered it. I'm the one who sent the documents to the journalist. I didn't want to lie to her, I needed her to trust me. I just thought you should know. Ethan threw all of us under the bus to save himself. And, well, it seems like he did the same to you. For a moment, I thought she was going to tell me to leave. But then her face crumpled. She put her head in her hands and let out a bitter laugh. Of course he did, she muttered. I can't believe I stayed with that bastard for so long. Bingo. I spent the next hour talking to Madeline, carefully steering the conversation while letting her vent. She told me about how Ethan had pressured her into signing off on the fake company, promising her it was just a formality. He said it was to protect their family's future, but she had always suspected it was something shady. She had gone along with it because she didn't think she had a choice. Now I'm stuck, she said, her voice breaking. If the SEC comes after him, they'll come after me too. I could lose everything. Not necessarily, I said gently. If you cooperate with the investigation, they might cut you a deal. But you'd need to distance yourself from Ethan completely. And, well, I hesitated, as if I were reluctant to say the next part. You'd probably need to share whatever you know about his finances. All of it. Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place, fear. Anger. Maybe both. I don't even know where to start. I can help, I said. I still have contacts at Innovex. And I know exactly where Ethan hid everything. If you're willing to work with the authorities, I'll make sure they know you were manipulated. She didn't agree right away, but I could see the wheels turning. By the time we parted ways, I was confident she would come around. And if she didn't? I had other plans. While Madeline deliberated, the SEC got involved, just as I knew they would. Innovex's board had no choice but to hand over their financial records, and it didn't take long for the investigators to start unraveling Ethan's schemes. Every payment, every fake invoice, every shady transaction, it all led back to him. By now, Ethan had gone into hiding. His social media accounts were deleted, his phone disconnected. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted him to feel the full weight of what he had done, to experience the humiliation and helplessness he had inflicted on so many others. That's when I reached out to one of my former clients, a woman named Rebecca who ran a popular podcast about corporate corruption. She loved telling stories about the fall of powerful men, and Ethan was the perfect subject. When I pitched her the idea, she practically salivated. This is going to be huge, Rebecca said. But I'll need an insider to interview. Someone who can really paint the picture. I hesitated for a moment, then smiled. I think I know someone. The podcast episode dropped 2 weeks later, and it was an instant hit. Rebecca was a master storyteller, and she wove together everything, the fake invoices, the merger, the anonymous whistleblower, with a level of drama that would make Netflix jealous. But the real bombshell was Madeline. She had agreed to be interviewed anonymously, and her voice, altered slightly for privacy, added a layer of raw emotion to the story. She described how Ethan had manipulated her, how he had used her name and trust to further his schemes. She didn't hold back, calling him a pathological liar and a coward. The public ate it up. Ethan went from being a disgraced CEO to a full-blown pariah. Investors pulled out of projects he was involved in. Former clients came forward with their own complaints. And the SEC's investigation only intensified. By the end of the month, Innovex announced that the merger had been delayed indefinitely. The company was bleeding money, and without Ethan to spin the story, the cracks in their foundation became impossible to ignore. I could have stopped there. I could have walked away, knowing I had done more than enough to ruin Ethan's life. But there was still one more step to my plan. One final move to ensure that he would never, ever recover. By the time I reached the final stage of my plan, Ethan was a broken man. His career was obliterated, his finances under investigation, and his name tarnished beyond repair. Innovex had officially collapsed under the weight of the scandal, the merger permanently called off. Madeline had filed for divorce and was cooperating with the SEC in exchange for immunity. Everything had gone perfectly. Too perfectly. There was just one loose end that wouldn't let me rest. It was a feeling I couldn't shake, an itch at the back of my mind. Something was missing. After all the digging, all the calculated moves, there was one question I'd never been able to answer: why? Why had Ethan done it? Why would someone who already had power, money, and influence risk it all on such a reckless scheme? I couldn't let it go. I needed closure. One evening, as I sat in my apartment sipping wine and scrolling through the latest headlines about Ethan, my phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from a burner account I didn't recognize. The subject line simply read, "I know what you did." My stomach dropped. I opened the email cautiously, expecting some empty threat. Instead, it was short and cryptic. "You think you've won. You think you're smarter than everyone else. But Ethan isn't the only one with secrets. Meet me tomorrow, 10 p.m., Trinity Warehouse. Come alone, or I go public." I reread the email at least 5 times, trying to parse its meaning. Was this a trap? A desperate attempt by Ethan to strike back? Or was someone else involved in this mess, someone I hadn't accounted for? Curiosity got the better of me. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, but I made sure to slip a small recording device into my bag. If this was some kind of last-ditch effort by Ethan, I wanted it on record. The warehouse was a cold, cavernous space on the outskirts of the city. As I stepped inside, the dim light of a single hanging bulb illuminated a figure standing in the middle of the room. My heart skipped a beat when I realized who it was. Madeline. She was dressed sharply, in a tailored black coat and heels that clicked against the concrete floor as she approached me. Her face was calm, almost serene, but her eyes held something I hadn't seen before: triumph. "Mia," she said, her voice dripping with amusement. "I wondered if you'd come." "What's this about?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. "If this is some kind of game." "Oh, it's not a game," she interrupted, her lips curling into a smile. "It's the truth. And I thought you deserved to hear it. After all, you worked so hard to bring Ethan down." She pulled out a tablet from her bag and tapped the screen. A video began to play, the grainy footage showing Ethan sitting at a table in what looked like a dingy motel room. He looked disheveled, defeated. "I didn't even want to do it," Ethan's voice crackled through the speakers. "She made me. She said it was the only way to secure our future. I didn't think she'd go this far." The camera panned, revealing the person he was speaking to, Madeline. My blood turned to ice. "I told you," Ethan said, his voice shaking. "I'll take the fall, but you've got to protect me. You said we were in this together." Madeline leaned into the frame, her expression cold and calculating. "I said I'd protect you as long as you played your part. But now? You're just collateral damage." The video ended. My mouth went dry as Madeline tucked the tablet away, watching me with a smirk. "You see," she said casually, "Ethan wasn't the mastermind. He was just a pawn. All those fake invoices, the shell company, the embezzlement, it was my idea. Ethan didn't have the spine for something like that. But I did. I took a step back, my mind reeling. You set him up. Set him up, she laughed. No, darling. Ethan played his role perfectly. He was the perfect scapegoat. I knew his arrogance would make him an easy target, and I knew someone like you would eventually sniff out the truth. All I had to do was make sure the trail led to him. You used me, I said, the realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. You let me do all the dirty work for you. Madeline shrugged. Don't take it personally. You wanted revenge, I wanted freedom. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement, though you didn't realize it at the time. I clenched my fists, anger boiling in my chest. The SEC will figure it out. They'll find out it was you. She smiled again, this time with a chilling confidence. No, they won't. I've already cut a deal. I gave them everything they wanted, emails, bank records, even the accounts Ethan used to funnel the money. As far as they're concerned, I'm the dutiful wife who was manipulated by her corrupt husband. And now? I get to walk away clean. I stared at her, stunned. So what do you want from me? Why bring me here? Her smile faltered, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. Because I wanted you to know the truth, she said quietly. I wanted you to understand that, in the end, I won. Not Ethan. Not you. Me. She turned to leave, her heels echoing against the concrete. Before she reached the door, she paused and looked over her shoulder. Oh, and Mia. If I were you, I'd keep this little revelation to myself. You wouldn't want the SEC wondering why you had so much insider knowledge, would you? And with that, she was gone, leaving me alone in the empty warehouse. I drove home in a daze, her words replaying in my head. Madeline had played all of us, me, Ethan, the board, even the SEC. She had orchestrated everything, turning everyone else into pawns in her game. And the worst part? She had won. When I got home, I poured myself a drink and sat in silence, staring at the blank wall in front of me. I had wanted justice, and I had gotten it, just not the way I'd imagined. Ethan was ruined, but the real villain had walked away scot-free. For the first time since this whole thing began, I didn't feel victorious. I felt used. As I took another sip of wine, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a news alert. I opened it, my heart sinking as I read the headline. Madeline Grayson, the victim who took down a corrupt CEO. Her face smiled back at me from the article's thumbnail, polished and poised, the picture of resilience. She had spun the narrative perfectly, painting herself as the hero of the story. I set the phone down, my mind racing. Madeline thought she'd won. She thought she'd outsmarted everyone. But if there was one thing I had learned from all of this, it was that revenge doesn't end when the curtain falls. There's always another act. And I wasn't done yet.